Hi, my name's Matt Henricks. I'm the founder of the Waterworks program, and I just want to start this video by saying a huge thank you for being involved. If you're watching a Helpdesk video, then chances are you've taken the plunge, you've decided to build a water filtration system that's going to change your whole family's life, and you've chosen to do that as part of a staff development, leadership day, maybe even at a school or a family session, and irrespective of the kind of context within which you're going to use our activity, we're just so grateful for your choice to do that. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. You know, when we started this activity, we had no idea how big it would grow and how quickly it would grow that big, but as we sit here today, we've changed the prospects for 12 whole villages in Uganda and Kenya. We've got huge plans for the future, and it's only through people like yourself. One thing to put out there to start this activity is that when we actually built this activity, we asked ourselves what the best way to actually maximise our contribution in the world was going to be. And, you know, frankly, that wasn't by having me stand up in front of a group of people and build a water system. It was by me enabling people just like yourself to go out there and build as many as they possibly could. So we like to think that you're a new member of our army of facilitators out there. We like to think that the impact that we're all going to have in the world is exponentially going to grow from this day forward, and we're really excited to have you on board. It's fair to say that in keeping with that, we really want you to take our IP, to use it and build on it. Of course, if you've got feedback on improving, let us know. But the whole idea of all of the materials that we've sent out, including this Helpdesk video, is we want to empower you to make it your own. We want you to run world-class training and development sessions yourself. Waterworks might just be a part of the amazing stuff that you are doing in your business or workplace or personal life. But either way, we want you to feel empowered to use that IP as you see fit. So, what are we going to cover in this video? We're going to cover, first of all, we'll cover what came with your facilitator kit. We'll kind of orient ourselves through all of that material. We'll cover not just the equipment that came with it, but kind of give you a sense around the kind of content and training you can get from various different sources, not just this Helpdesk video. We'll then kind of go through and look at the equipment in each of our kits. We'll build a kit and kind of explain as a facilitator the kind of steps that you want to make very clear to your participants, otherwise they will get a bit confused. And then we want to finish probably by just some words of encouragement and also a bit of a plug to the book that we've written recently, which we know will really take your facilitation to the next level. So let's start by talking about the materials that would have come with your facilitation kit. And the first one, the most obvious one, is one of these bad boys, one of our kits. You can see that the kit has the label "Please do not open until advised," and that's a really conscious effort from us to make sure that everything we do as much as possible is in a program ready state. Now, in addition to that, that kit, the only thing on top of it for, I guess, participant materials that you'll be getting with every order are 3 drink bottles. These great water bottles that we've got behind us, they're giveaways. We totally get that some people will choose to donate them back and recycle them. Plenty of people have plenty of drink bottles out there, but we really wanted each participant to have a memento by which they could remember the contribution they made within our activity. And we felt like, well, what better than a water bottle? Effectively, we ask people when they take away our drink bottles to take a sip from it, and every time they take a sip from that water bottle from now onwards, to kind of reflect on how lucky they are, first of all, to be able to just turn on the tap to get fresh drinking water, but also of the life-changing contribution that they've obviously made as part of this program. So they're effectively the 2 main participant pieces of equipment. In addition to that, facilitators will also receive 2 other fantastic resources. So you'll get 1 facilitator book per order, and actually, as a facilitator, if you reorder multiple times, please do let us know if you only need one of these things. Printing wise alone, they cost us $30 to $50 depending on how many we order at each time. So it's such a valuable resource that we'd love to minimise the printing if we can. Now this book comes with a whole bunch of information. It's fair to say that it's no substitute for this video, but probably more accurately, this video isn't a substitute for this book. It doesn't only include a whole range of sample agendas, background information about clean water, technical information about our filtration systems. There's not much that isn't in here, so please do take the time to read that document. On top of that, every order will receive a USB flash drive, and that'll have preloaded not just this video, not just the in-program videos that we suggest you show, but everything that we can imagine you might need should all be on this. And the most important document on this, there's an introductory letter in the flash drive that says to read me first. Always read that document, because if there's any new developments, any kind of technical challenges we're having, or things that we just know that facilitators really need to be aware of, we'll always include them in that read me first document to check out. So amongst those things, they're the things that come with every order. Let's talk first about what we're going to do as facilitators when we want to run our first session. Of course, you've got sample slides that are included on that USB flash drive. They'll kind of give you an outline. They're just a starting place. Feel free to delete as many slides or insert as many additional ones as you want. That's totally okay. That's the whole way we've designed it. But let's talk briefly about this box. Of course, it does give the game away in terms of what our brand is, and shifty people might look up our URL and try and figure out what they're going to do. But in general, people won't understand when they come in and see this in their activity that are going to run a Waterworks activity. They equally won't be that emotionally vested in it. So the difference between knowing that they're building a water system up here versus knowing in here is hugely different. So don't get too hung up on needing to hide these boxes. I think they do a good enough job of hiding themselves, all of the contents inside anyway. When, as a facilitator, you build a single water system in our programs, you're basically building one of these. Now it's an emergency kit. It's all going to fit back in that shoebox, and it's going to come back to us before we send it over to Africa on your behalf. But it's fair to say that on top of that, that emergency kit that you build that goes back into this system, there's a second donation that you'll be able to track as well. We'll explain the way that all works in a second, but the first thing to note is there's always going to be a tracking number on the outer box that comes program ready. That tracking number will identify how you can follow where exactly this emergency kit ends up. Now, we've built a website called 3 Billion Stories. We built it with that name because we really had this kind of naive sense that there's 3 billion people in the world that live on less than $2.50 a day, that live in poverty, and effectively, wouldn't it be great if every one of our stories is a story of one of those people climbing their way out of poverty? Maybe that first little leg up, that first little nudge, and kind of empowerment that person needs to really change their life. And so, if there's 3 billion people out there, let's make that our goal. The 3 Billion Stories website is the way to track where each of these is. So basically go to that website, plug in the number that's on the outside of this white box. Every now and then facilitators will try and plug in just the numbers. You can see that this tracking number is just WW1884E. Now every one of those digits needs to be plugged in to be able to track that particular story. Don't just plug in 1884 or 1884E. You need to type in the WW and the numbers and the letter. Now if you're running a major program and you really want a particular alphanumeric code that will really help reinforce the messages or the branding of your event, then by all means let us know, we can always register it in that. But by default, the tracking numbers will normally look a bit like that. Now for every water system that you build in our multiplier event, you'll also be donating and building an additional household kit. And the household kits will be decorating on an artwork slate just like this. It's foam board, so it's quite durable. It also looks kind of nice if you decorate it and you can pin it to your wall back in your staff lunchroom or similar. But effectively, it's your choice how you want to decorate this artwork slate. The only thing we say is not to have any specific religious comments there, because that might limit the different people that we can give these water systems to. But what's going to happen is that artwork is going to be scanned in and it's going to be appended to the outside of a long-term household water system that will be donating on your behalf. Once again, there's a 3 billion stories tracking number. You'll see that this one is denoted with WW1884H, and that's because this is for a household system, and the outer box of course is the same number but with an E. That's because it's an emergency system. We'd like to think that every workshop participant that gets involved in this, we want to kind of increase the likelihood that they'll remember the tracking number and check it out after the workshop. So that's where the kind of the multiplier part of this activity comes from. You're not just building an emergency kit that's going to go to someone desperately in need, but you're also building a household kit. Word of warning, as a facilitator, you can absolutely promise quite confidently that the household kits, that every single group that gets involved will receive a photo back from their end recipient, and that photo will have visibly the artwork that they did. But with the emergency kits, those are handed out in some pretty dire situations where sometimes frankly we can't stay for very long. And so typically we may have one overall photo of a number of families at once receiving these emergency kits. Sometimes we might not even have photos, we might just have in the 3 Billion Stories website just a note around where exactly it was donated. If we can't provide you photos, please just know that it must have been going to a family in the direst of need, and if anything, hopefully a group can feel more encouraged by that, because their system really has changed someone's life that was in desperate need. So that's kind of that's where the multiplier part of the activity goes. If you're by chance just building an emergency kit and you're not getting involved in a multiplier activity, that's not our preferred way to run the activity. But if you are running it in that way, you obviously just won't have the additional artwork slate inside the kit, but you'll still have a tracking number on the outside of your box. So let's talk about the rest of this box, since we've started to empty it anyway. There's first of all a pouch here that has a whole bunch of materials in it. Let's kind of quickly go through them to give you a sense around the kind of stuff that's in this pouch. We've effectively put everything in here that you're likely to recycle and put back in there to return to us. Something that we're really proud of with our program is we've really sought to minimise our impact on the environment by looking to reuse and recycle everything as much as we can. So everything here, if you're done with it and it's not part of the actual build, then please pop it back in this before you return it, and we'll make sure that we use it again in a future program. First of all, you couldn't build a real water filtration system that we're confident of the hygiene of it without some hand sanitizer there, without washing our hands first. So step 3 of the activity is actually to sanitize your hands. That'll be in the pouch there. If people want to take that hand sanitizer, that's one of those recyclables that we can't really use just for health and safety reasons. There's also a series of assembly cards. Now, there's a whole bunch of steps to building our water system, 17 steps to be exact. And we put them on cards because as a facilitator, we know that there's a whole bunch of different creative ideas that you're going to have. We know people that have held quizzes in order to earn the cards. We know people who have shuffled these cards up and given them to various groups and kind of used as an icebreaker to get them to go out, introduce themselves, and kind of see which cards they can kind of trade as part of a lead-in activity. That's why we've done it in assembly cards as opposed to assembly manuals. So still on the contents of this blue pouch, we've got a whole bunch of really quick, cheap blindfolds, and the purpose of these blindfolds is to remind people that the biggest cause of avoidable blindness in the world is this horrible thing called trachoma. Trachoma is basically a chlamydial infection in the eye. It's something that gradually impacts people. Typically they'll contract it in early childhood or late childhood, and by the time that people reach adolescence or early adulthood, at times they'll be completely blind, if not somewhere along the way to that inevitable outcome. Effectively, trachoma is completely avoidable, and the way you avoid it is with clean water. So we give blindfolds because as an activity we want you to remind people what it would be like to have to basically go about life blind. And also we like to think as a facilitator that you can help people connect with that on a deeply personal way. We'll talk a bit more about the blindfolds and the way that as a facilitator you're going to bring that to life for people. Still in our little pouch here, you'll have one of two things. You'll either have a small packet of crayons, or you'll have some markers, or you'll have a combination of both of those two things. Now what we've found is when we ship these all around the world, some jurisdictions help us clear customs better if we have crayons, some with the markers. So either way, we'll give you some equipment to do the artwork. That's not to say that you need to be limited by that, and it's certainly not to say that we don't want you to encourage your groups to share colours and kind of and collaborate in that way. In fact, that's actually what they should be doing, and what you'll be pointing out as a facilitator if they don't. The final thing is, I think, probably the nicest emotional touch to our activity, and that's a sticker that says assembled with love for donation only. Now a bit about this sticker, when we go to Africa and other parts of the world, the educational levels in the communities that we work in are often relatively low. They're deeply honoured to host us in their village, and if we just sent them our emergency kit with that please do not open until advised note, we know that there's some families that would choose to not open the equipment and use it even though it's going to change their lives, just because of those instructions, because they want to honour our requests and they're deeply honoured by the gift. That's pretty sad, and we wouldn't want people to ever misinterpret that sign. And so this sticker, assembled with love for donation only, the purpose of that is to be the final step in the build. Effectively, we want your groups to not just build that water system and pop it back in, but at the end we want you to take the back off that sticker and put it over the top of that label, and kind of just smile and know that that's actually the first thing people are going to see, is that that this gift was assembled with love. So that's all that comes with the blue pouch inside. You can kind of get a sense already. We don't ever reuse the eye masks, just for health and safety purposes, but if there's any unused still in their plastic wrapper, we want you to pop them back in once you're done. We've also got the hand sanitizer. Once again, feel free to keep that for your own purposes, but those assembly cards, of course, that saves us an enormous amount of money if we don't have to reprint them every time. Pop them all back into that pouch, and we don't mind if you ship them back separately to us or you ship them back inside the box that they came in. Either way, we'll take that out. We'll be able to recycle and reuse them and put them to really good use. So let's talk about, as a facilitator, what else have you got in here? Well, in here, you've got a whole bunch of other materials that form part of the actual core system. You've got a bag here, which we'll show you in a second. The bag has a hole in it for our filtration equipment. It comes with some basic instructions that people can use that receive it if they can speak English. The water filter itself, it's a ceramic filter. Be very careful with this. It's if you kind of give it a flick, you can feel how it's relatively thin. In fact, it's entirely hollow. I don't know, it depends which kind of measurement scale you use, but you know, a few millimeters thick is what this ceramic is. Effectively, the water will seep through the outside of this ceramic filter and come out this end tube. You're already guessing at this stage, I bet, how to build the system. It will always come in a bubble wrap container to shield it from getting damaged, because it's obviously so precious. On top of that, there's a clear plastic tube. There'll be a bag with a bunch of different materials. Sometimes those materials will be loose in the box, sometimes they'll be in a bag. Either way, there'll be a whole bunch of different parts, smaller parts. There's also a scouring brush which we want you to give to your end recipient to really maintain and maximise the durability of their system. And then on top of that, you've got the makings of a collapsible water container. This can be used as a vestibule for the water that comes out of the kits that you make. So that's all the equipment that your participants will have. In fact, they won't see it because you won't have instructed them to open that box. But let's talk through the way a build should work and some of those instructions that are going to be really important as a facilitator. Now, it's fair to say that our activity was designed to be done in groups of 3. We have to do that to have a sense of how many of the blindfolds we include and all of the other equipment. If you want to build this activity in larger groups, by all means go for it. We've built it in groups of up to 8 and it works quite well, but I think as you start to go into some of those bigger groups, you might want to get creative and add in additional kind of ancillary activities to really bring the activity to life as well. But let's kind of talk first about these bad boys, the blindfolds. The way that we typically advise you to run this activity is we advise you that each group should nominate a facilitator, and that facilitator should be able to see but not touch, and that the team members all should be blindfolded. Those team members should be able to touch but not see. Effectively, what you're doing is you're giving leaders a vision of what they should be trying to do, but they need to really focus on communicating in a really effective way to their team members in order to get this job done effectively. The team members, of course, will be kind of fumbling around a bit in the dark, won't even have a sense around what the equipment looks like, let alone how it goes together without the guidance of the leaders. And of course, there's some really great metaphors as a facilitator you can draw back to the workplace and make relevant as well. So in order to make all of that work, you really don't want your team members to even see the equipment, to even open this and empty it out onto their table until they've got their blindfold on. Even getting a mental model of each component part can help them hugely as someone that's lost sight. So the first thing you want to do is you want to get teams to quickly nominate who their leader's going to be. Explain that the first thing that those leaders should do is to open up the equipment, and the first thing that they should touch, and the only thing that they should touch, are these blindfolds, because of course they're going to then distribute those blindfolds one to every person and ask that each person puts that on. Of course, as a facilitator, you might choose that that's a bit complicated, and you might choose to get into the equipment and take out the blindfolds and put them separately on each person's table. We've had groups that even choose to use bandanas, to use various colours. They don't like our daggy kind of cheap blindfolds and they want to use something different, by all means, make it your own, make the activity your own. So that's kind of the first step, right? Once the leader's made sure that everyone's got their blindfold on and the leader's the only one that can see, then they should be instructing their co-workers to basically empty out all of the equipment, and they should start the activity from there. As a leader, it's fair to say that that you might, as a facilitator, permit them to touch the instruction cards, but equally you might make that even an extra complication. You might make the team members' job to find different cards even though they can't see them, and hold them steady for the leader to read them. So the leader's going to go through each instruction card one at a time. Of course, the very first instruction, you can't come from an HR background like I do without being really cognizant of health and safety matters. So of course, if we're blindfolding people, we want them to have a really brief conversation around what kind of hazards there might be in the workplace. And of course, if we're blindfolding people, the major hazard we want them to be aware of is not to kind of put those blindfolds on and start walking around the room, because someone will trip over, and of course, that's the purpose of this Helpdesk video, is to encourage you as a facilitator. Don't chuck out that first card. Make sure people do consider their surrounds, consider the major risks. And as a facilitator, normally I kind of prompt them with, of course, when you're blindfolded, you shouldn't really be moving around while you've got those blindfolds on. Sit at your table, make sure you're really safe. You're going to go through each of those steps, and as a leader, normally I like to say, give each leader about 5 minutes to lead the group before asking them to rotate. So of course, as a facilitator, you're going to have to be really, really clear in that instruction. You're going to have to say, can everyone please down tools? Now I'm going to ask each leader that currently doesn't have a blindfold on, please put on a blindfold and then nominate a new leader. Now if you don't give instructions that clearly, maybe they're different instructions, but if you're not as explicit as that, then what you're going to find is you'll have 2 leaders, you'll have people doing a bit of a handover, and all of a sudden you're going to have your groups finding this assembly way too easy and not quite getting the point of that whole disability. On that disability, a point that's really important for you to be able to clarify. It's really important that you can explain what trachoma is, and also to kind of make it real for people. So normally what I kind of explain is that in some of these more underdeveloped nations of the world, the kind of places that we work, it's often an expectation that a man would build a home with his own bare hands before he'd be able to attract a partner, and when you kind of think about that, you think about as a woman in some of these cultures, there's an awful lot of work involved, an awful lot of expectation to not just raise kids, but do an awful lot of manual work every day. If you think about either of those roles, this kind of very clear expectation of being a breadwinner, of someone that can physically farm and build a home, of a mum that has got more responsibilities than you can even imagine. And you kind of try and transport people into that environment and explain, now try and imagine that you live in a culture like that, and imagine that you're losing your sight or just lost it, and imagine that you've gone into one of your most important phases of life, early adulthood, and there really is no prospect of gaining that sight back. If you kind of take people on that journey before telling them to take on their blindfold, you'll find people be a lot more dutiful in doing it. You'll find them actually gain meaning from that part of the activity rather than just be frustrated by it. So that's kind of to start with. That's probably the most important instructions as a facilitator. Be really clear on that process around the blindfolds and removing it. In the instruction cards, I think it's on about step 12, it actually talks about the final quality check it talks about if you've got blindfolds on, first try and conduct a quality assessment of the equipment with the blindfolds on, and then take off the blindfolds and do another quality check. So you actually don't need to, as a facilitator, tell people when to remove the blindfold. Of course, we don't want them doing the artwork component of the activity blindfolded, but lo and behold, the artwork activity doesn't start until step 14. And so, of course, if they just follow these instructions, it's very clear in those when they are to remove the blindfolds. So all as a facilitator you need to really focus on is really managing that process of the leader and the followers being different, and to manage that process really clearly when the leader changes over and dons his or her eye mask and also nominates a new leader. So I think as a facilitator they're the main kind of key parts to think about. It's fair to say, obviously, as a facilitator, if you're not involved in the multiplier activity, but you happen to have all of the assembly instructions beyond just packing things back into the box, it's fair to say that if by accident we send you steps 14 through to 17, it's fair to say that those instructions aren't relevant if you're just doing an emergency kit and you're not involved in the full multiplier experience. So be aware of that, and just make sure that that's pretty easy. You just take out the cards that you don't think are relevant. So to assemble a kit, I'm going to just quickly assemble one now. I'm not going to follow the instructions because I've done a few of these in the time, but it's fair to say I'll pause at a couple of places that are likely to cause your groups some concern or at least a bit of inertia. So first of all, what we're going to do is we've got our bag here. The bag has got a hole pre-drilled, and we're going to take a washer, one of these black thick washers. We're going to put it on the outside of our ceramic filter, and then we're going to slide that filter inside the plastic bag and through the hole that is already pre-drilled in that bag. You've then got another black washer that's identical to the first. It's going to create a really good seal around that hole, and then you've got this final piece which has already got threads on it. You just simply screw that in, make sure it's nice and tight, and it will build pressure between those washers and make sure that that's nice and watertight. At that point, you've effectively got a water system that can be used and is highly effective. It's just that you don't have any way of transporting or storing that water. We then have a water tube, which you can see is clear there. That can simply go into the nozzle like that, and you can twist it in with your fingers, and that water tube could be either put into someone's drink bottle. When I'm travelling through Africa, I normally take an emergency kit myself, but I'll typically pop it straight into my drink bottle to filter water direct into the container I'm going to take it with. But of course, what our kits come with is a collapsible container that actually is sufficient to store 10 litres of water. That container comes almost assembled. You've got a few different attachments for the nozzle. I'll just hold them towards the camera here so you can see them. But effectively, this is the bit that's obviously got the thread on it that's going to screw into the container. This is the part that the tap will actually be sheathed in, and of course you need to assemble them in a particular way. So you'll see if you put that into the thread, that's pretty straightforward, easy to do that. And of course you couldn't do it with this handle in it because it would be too big. Once you've assembled that, you can see that that this part has a nozzle that's clearly sort of leaning downwards, and that's obviously the orientation that we'd like this to be held with. We're then going to slide the tap through that that component, and it's going to require a bit of pressure. it's fair to say that if you're blindfolded and you're doing this activity, that can take a bit of courage and certainly a fair bit of leadership to get people to be confident enough that they're doing the right thing but also applying the right pressure. You can see there that the completed nozzle has the tap protruding quite a long way down, or in America they'd say faucet, but the tap or a faucet protruding quite a way below, and there you go, it can be screwed on really quite easily onto the water container. You can see there that as we do it, it's obviously easy to cross the thread, so even as I'm trying to talk and screw at the same time, I've needed to stop and be a bit more careful. So you can see there that the tap fits on like that. If you look inside the tap, it's probably a bit hard to see on camera, but there's actually a little opening in the faucet that you can see through the assembly, and that's the opening that lets water come into the tap. So you can see how this tap works quite visibly in that way. That's all of the assembly that's required. Effectively, as a recipient, they're going to get two parts of the build. They're going to get this bag, which we encourage people to put back into the container. Of course, that bag you'll be able to fill with water. It will filter through this at about 7 litres per hour. The water will flow down this tube. And then we're giving them this water container, which if I was to pull it out, would turn into a perfect square and store up to 10 litres of water, or about 3 gallons of water. But I'm not going to do that because I want it to all fit back into the box. The other thing that it's fair to say, people wonder, well, why do I not connect it? You don't need to connect it. Once that container is expanded in situ, people will very comfortably unscrew the tap, use the tube to fill it up, and then screw that tap back on to transport wherever they like it. So there is no need to connect those two components of the emergency system, but groups will often kind of see a need even though the instructions are pretty clear. Let's talk about quickly how this is going to all pack up in the box. So the instructions once again are pretty clear about this, but people won't read the instructions, so let's kind of cover it. You've got your collapsible container. It's going to go into the box like so. The tap will sometimes, in order to fit it in there, will sometimes need to be turned, otherwise it will protrude below the container and be a bit tricky to get in there. So there's the container. You've got obviously your bag assembly here. Now that ceramic filter didn't get any less breakable because we put it in a plastic bag. So if people haven't destroyed their bubble wrap, it's always a really neat idea to wrap that bubble wrap around the ceramic filter, but to do so within the bag. We don't want to destroy the value they created by assembling the system. So just sheathe it back in there like so. You've then got the bag, which normally there's some fold lines that are very clear from the way it came out of the box, and we're just going to ask people to roll that up along that line, and you'll see that this will get quite compact at that point. The tubing can be wrapped around in any way that you want, but effectively that will all fit quite snugly back inside the box that it came in. And like so, that's effectively all of the equipment that they've assembled all fitting back in there. But let's cover a couple of other little things quickly that people won't necessarily think of because they're not covered in the instructions, and we do genuinely want to just include them for the end recipient, not as part of this assembly. So first of all, there's this white Velcro tab. Now that's actually going to be really important because this emergency bag assembly, this Velcro part can be used to create a small loop at the top of the bag, and that loop is going to be what cuts off the flow of water when people have effectively filled up their containers. So this Velcro piece is a really important part. It shouldn't be thrown away, but we don't ask people to attach that. They can just leave that in the box. But effectively, that's one part, the Velcro tab. The other thing that they will have noticed is this hook. Now the hook is a closely related part. Now, of course, it could hang over a branch or the back of a tree or the back of a door, but its purpose in the context of this is to hold up that bag. And of course, that's the way your kit's going to look when it's filled with water. You're going to want to pull all of the rope you can around that hook to hold that weight over the door, against a coat rack, or over a tree branch. That hook, once again, can't be assembled in the group, but is of course a really critical part of your gift to the end family. And this tool is probably the most curious. I'll just hold it to the camera here. You can see that it's a wire device. Now, I'm a dry cleaner's son. I was kind of brought up with this sense that you can solve anything with coat hanger wire, and it kind of feels like one of those kind of situations to me. In fact, this is ingenious. What people do is they can heat up this cutting tool. They can heat it up in the light of a flame or the coals of a stove, and then they can use it to actually punch a hole through a water container of their own choosing, and they could use that to effectively connect this tube through that hole into a container of their choosing. But equally, if they'd like to upgrade their system from a relatively undurable plastic bag, if they wanted to substitute in a rigid plastic bucket and to still use the equipment that you've sent them, then this cutting tool is going to enable them to do that. They're just simply going to heat it up, push it through the plastic, it'll cut a hole perfectly the right size, and it'll do that without the need for electricity or anything like that. Pretty ingenious stuff. Once again, you start to think of the context that we're working in overseas, and people don't have power drills, they don't have power full stop. So including a drill bit would not be the best kind of fit for purpose tool to give with our gift. Finally, we've got this scouring brush, and this is quite an important part of the gift, especially when we're hoping people will use these emergency kits not just in the short term, but we want this to be functional for many years to come. Really, when people use these water systems, there's very little that can go wrong, but what will happen over time, depending on the quality of the water that you're filtering through it, is you'll get this kind of any scum or impurities that are filtered out of the water will actually attach and kind of coat the outside of the ceramic filter itself. Now that can be really easily fixed by just simply taking that filter out of the bag, giving it a quick once over with this scourer, maybe a rinse with some clean water if you've got some left over, and then you'll see that the throughput of that water system will increase almost immediately, because you won't have all of that extra material on the outside of the filter. So this is a really incredible addition, even though it looks really simple. So effectively, you're going to get your participants are going to put together all of this equipment. Maybe they've attached the Velcro tab, maybe they haven't. Maybe they've kind of seen purposes for these parts that weren't anticipated, maybe they haven't. Either way, all of that is going to go back into the container that this came with, And really, it's a pretty simple process. The final step, of course, is to include that sticker that says assembled with love for donation only, and to append that over the top of the sign. There it is. That's effectively the gift, and that's the state it's going to come in to Africa. Of course, we'll quality check it once it comes to us, but we'd love as a facilitator if you could make those checks yourself. Secondly, you've got this pouch, and of course you're going to just shove everything else that you've got left in there. Anything that you know can't be recycled and thrown out, by all means throw it out, but everything else you're going to put in that pouch, and you're effectively going to send us the same box that all of this arrived in, that you're going to send us a bunch of these and a bunch of these. Make sense? Hopefully. Let's just quickly touch base on a couple of the most common mistakes that people are going to make, and also some of the kind of quandaries that they're going to face during the build. It's a pretty simple assembly, to be honest, but it's a simple assembly that becomes a bit more tricky when you're blindfolded, which is, of course, the whole point. One thing that people will at times think of to do is, with this nozzle here, as you know, we're looking to attach this nozzle with the clear tube, and we need to apply a bit of pressure and twist it in, and then it's pretty straightforward and attached. But something that people will at times start to think, for whatever reason, they'll see that it fits in the opposite end of that nozzle, and they'll see that fits quite tightly, and then they'll start to convince themselves, oh, if only I push far enough, I'm going to get that tube through here, and of course that won't work, and it'll become very difficult, and they might get fixated on that approach. Of course, as a facilitator, my approach with all of this stuff is to leave them with that problem, to wait maybe until another leader takes over and kind of can challenge that approach. As a facilitator, I think the worst thing you can do is try and solve the problem for the group, because there's so many learnings that are in this activity that you can't then debrief. But of course, the most that's a pretty obvious assembly mistake. Another assembly mistake that people will make once they've assembled this nozzle and they've kind of put the tube, they'll look at this collapsible container and they'll think, boy, you know, it must connect in some way. Now, you and I both know, because we've explained that cutting tool, you and I both know that the end recipient will have the choice, if they want to, of being able to heat that element up, pushing a hole through and physically connecting these the canister with the bag kit. But it's fair to say that your participants won't know that. And so often it's quite common for them to take the tap assembly, to turn it upside down, and to then kind of connect this tube into the tap. And strangely, the tube will fit almost perfectly within that tap. In theory, it probably would actually work that way. In theory, you could open the tap to on and then use it to fill in that way. To be honest, it's an accident that it happens to fit like that way, but because it fits almost so perfectly, your recipients will find themselves connecting that. Now, the reason I cover it is not to say that that's in any way a bad thing, that they've been creative and that they've kind of seen an opportunity to connect the two components in a way that wasn't intended. The reason I mention it is it will get very difficult for them to fit that back into the box if they've done that. And of course, because this is physically the box that's going to find its way to Uganda, Kenya, South Sudan, wherever we're sending these kits, it's fair to say that that we don't want to mutilate the box in order to fit stuff into it. So all of that kind of comes in there, and like I said, if we roll it in two separate components, then that's the way to go. One final thing that people will often do with this tap assembly, you'll recall that I mentioned how hard it is to push that in, that it requires quite a bit of pressure and finger strength. Well, because of that, what you'll often find is people will put the tap in, you know, just halfway, and it'll be snug enough, but once you've assembled one of these and you know the way it works, you'd actually know that that would not be sufficient to be watertight. So one of two things would happen: either water would spew out of the faucet and for it not to be functional at all. But the other thing that might happen is it might just stop water coming out altogether, and effectively your end recipient would have to unscrew the entire assembly. So there's nothing scientific. They just need to use a bit more brute strength and push that that spindle in a bit more firmly, and that's all done. So that's all pretty straightforward in terms of the assembly. I want to talk just briefly about a couple of straightforward mistakes that people make that are easily avoidable on the artwork component of the activity. There's really three things I want to mention first. The first one is really obvious. There's a little sticker on the back of the artwork slate that says please leave this side blank. We do that because our entire way of tracking where your artwork goes, what sponsorship it was, what company sponsored it, all that kind of stuff, all of that is enabled by the tracking code on the bottom of that artwork slate. And so it's really important that the side that the group decorates is this side with that tracking number visible. The instructions are actually really clear about what we require from that artwork, and it's also important, it's quite clearly laid out that people need to take a couple of really good photos of that artwork. The main mistake that people make with the photos is that they'll take a photo of the artwork slate without that visible, or maybe they'll be too quick to do it and won't double check their work, and maybe it'll be a bit blurry. So that's a second kind of mistake that people might make. And then the third mistake is, frankly, not sending us the photos, either it be the artwork photo or the group photo. Of course, the group photo we will upload to 3 Billion Stories. It'll be a good memento of the group that you worked with, and remind you of them when you're kind of tracking your story later down the track. But the most important photo, even if you're not comfortable sharing your group's personal photo, you know, there's no privacy concerns associated with taking a photo or scanning in artwork. So even if people didn't want to email us a copy of their group photo, then you know, really do encourage them to send us a photo of this. What I'd say is I think you'll get out of this activity what you put in terms of the quality of the artwork. So if as a facilitator you leave it to the groups to take their photos, and you don't take much of an interest in the quality of those photos, then what you might find is that out the other end, that artwork, we've had to crop it in our office and maybe crop it, maybe stretch it, maybe do all sorts of weird and wonderful things, and that artwork just won't look as nice when it's printed out and adhered to the group sponsorship at the other end. So as a facilitator, what I always recommend is, of course, make your groups accountable for the artwork. Of course, remind them of those very clear instructions on the assembly cards, of the email address that they need to send things through to, and of course explain all of that to them. But in addition, collect these artwork slates up, take them back to the office and do some really good high quality scans of them once you get there, and email them through to us separately. It'll make all the difference in terms of the quality of post-workshop experience that you have. So hopefully this video has been helpful. If I was to give you two final tips, one would be to just make sure that you remember the role of a facilitator is to manage the process. It's not to do the work for your participants. If you're not clear on the process you're about to take people through, then they don't stand a hope. Please really focus in on the areas in the training that I've already given you, which talk about process and talk about how you're going to explain certain things to participants, and think about that, rehearse it prior to the workshop. I'm sure you'll do great. The second bit of advice that I'd give you is to consider buying my book. I think that one of the bits of feedback I've received is that one of the things that makes a facilitator, or takes a facilitator rather, from being good to great in the Waterworks program, is their ability to authentically kind of describe the situation of clean water globally. And the best way to do that is, of course, by telling really personal stories that grab people by the heart and help motivate them through the activity. Really, it's hard to it's not possible to teleport you over to Africa or Southeast Asia, or one of the parts of the world where they're really impacted by this problem. But I can tell you a few really great stories, and that's what this book is. It's called The Inspired Workplace. It's written on the premise that the most inspiring people in the world are the people that have nothing, that maybe, just maybe, us in the developed world have more to learn from them than the other way around. I think it's a good read. That's what the feedback's been. We'd really, really appreciate it if you supported our program by buying a copy of that in the lead up to facilitating one of our workshops. So with that being said, thank you so much for taking the plunge, for deciding to build a water filtration system, and welcome to part of our growing facilitator army. Together, we're really looking to put a big ding in the world. So thanks so much for all your support.